what's up? Today I'm gonna show you guys how to recreate the best tasting bowl of tonkotsu ramen I had when I was in Japan. It was actually from a chain ramen shop called Ichiran. The broth was creamy, unctuous, and just so silky. It gripped the noodles in a way that I had never experienced before, and it was kind of like a life-changing bowl of soup. Today, I'm gonna show you how to make the whole thing from scratch, including the aroma oil, the tare, the noodles, and the broth. And at the end of the video, I'm gonna show you guys a trick that I use to recreate that silky, creamy mouthfeel in the broth that you only get at the best tonkotsu shops in Japan. First, let's get started on that broth. To make it, I'll need 5 pounds of pork neck bones. I like neck bones because they usually have a good amount of meat on them, which makes more flavorful broth, but neck bones also tend to have bone marrow in the spinal area, and that's really great for making this broth extra creamy. Now, I'll just scoot these bones into a stock pot real quick, then add in 2 more pork items. The first is a chunk of pork trotter. Trotters are the most gelatinous food item on earth, and they're gonna give this broth great body and a real stick to your lips character. Next, I'll drop in a chunk of pork fat back, or pork belly would also work. Next, I'll cover these bones with water, then drop the pot on the stove and bring it up to a ripping boil. On their first boil, pork bones tend to make stock that smells barnyardy and it's very scummy. So once this pot is up to a rip, I'll pour off the first round of water, then spray the bones with cold water to clean everything up. This is gonna make a pork broth with a much more pleasant, clean pork flavor. Next, the bones go into a large pressure cooker and I'll top them with 5,000 grams or about 5 liters of water. From here, I'll cook these on high pressure for an hour and 20 minutes. No pressure cooker? No problem. Just simmer your stock on the stovetop for 4 to 5 hours. While that cooks, let's make the flavor base of this ramen. It's called tare. To recreate the Ichiran tare, I've got 4 main ingredients here, all of them deeply umami in their own special way. I've got 30 grams of kombu, or seaweed here, 30 grams of bonito flakes, that's basically smoked tuna that's been dried and shaved, 30 grams of salted and dried anchovies, and then 30 grams of dried shitake mushrooms. By the way, all of these ingredients, plus the pork bones, trotter, and fat were available at the International Grocery Store. If you can't find the dried stuff, I'll link down below to where you can buy it cheaply online. Now, I'll just scoot all the umamis into the saucepan here, then top with 500 grams of light soy sauce. Regular dark soy sauce would work totally fine, by the way. You'll just have browner broth later on. Then 5 grams of sugar and 1,500 grams of water. I'll drop the pot on the stove, bring it up to a simmer or just below like 200F, then I'll steep this for 1 hour. I don't hard boil the umamis because in my opinion they lose their fresh edge, and tare is all about intense, sharp flavors. Next, let's start the CHASHU, or the tender pork that gets sliced and served in the hot broth. To get started, I'll grab 3 to 4 pounds of boneless pork shoulder, and to prep it for the pot, I'm going to tie it up into a roast shape with twine. I'll do that by wrapping the edge here and tying that down. Then I'll move 2 inches down the roast from that, wrap with twine, then pull the string under and loop at the top. Once the string is pulled through, I'm going to move that intersection forward and pull it back a couple times to create as much tension as possible. I'll repeat this wrap around, tuck under, and pull maneuver 3 more times. Then I'll flip the roast over and thread the string through the bottom side, creating even more tension. By the way, this step is not required and you could just braise the meat right away, but I do it to ensure a round roast that cooks evenly. To cook it, I'll drop it into a hot Dutch oven with a generous squeezer of olive oil in the bottom and sear it on all sides until this roast is golden brown. Searing the meat adds a little bit of flavor, but it also kind of blanches the outside of the pork and helps curb any unpleasant barnyard aromas that you get from the outside if you just straight up boiled it, similar to blanching the bones. And once this roast has been seared golden on all sides, I'll add in my cooking liquid. That's just a combination of 3,000 grams of water, a sliced knob of ginger, and then 500 grams of soy sauce. Next, I'll just bring this up to a simmer, turn the heat down to low, pop on a lid, and cook this for about 90 minutes. We'll check back then. Next, let's check back on that pork broth. As you can see, this broth is looking mucho rich and fatty. That's what we want, but it's not even close to the creamy, milky consistency that we're looking for in the final soup. To get it there, I'm gonna move this broth back into my large stock pot and bring it up to a very, very lively boil. This combination of high heat and aggressive bubbling breaks the fat globules on top of the broth into teeny tiny little droplets that will emulsify with the water, making the broth much creamier and full-bodied. I'll boil it for 30 minutes. While that rips, I'll strain the umamis out of my tare and give it a quick taste. Whoa, that is extremely flavorful. It's like multiple different types of salty all at the same time. You've got the dark soy flavor, which is very umami, very complicated. And then you've got the clean, seaweed flavor from the Kombu, and then my favorite, that smoky, fishy flavor from the bonito. It's really freaking insane how flavorful this is. Whew, and pretty salty. But it needs to be because this broth is gonna be unseasoned. Speaking of broth, after 30 minutes of boiling, it's milky looking, and it's been reduced by about 25 to 30%. All that's left now is to strain off those bones. As you can see, the fat is fully mixed into the soup now, but once we cool it, that fat is going to separate slightly, so we'll need a special move later on to cream things back up, but we'll get to that when we build the final bowl. Checking back on my pork shoulder, after about 90 to 100 minutes of cooking, the texture should be soft, but definitely not shreddable. We want a texture that holds together when sliced and then easily melts in your mouth once you chew it. At this point, there should be some light resistance when you twist it with a fork. Now, I'll just cool this in the liquid for about another hour, then I'll move it to the fridge wrapped up for tomorrow. That's day one of ramen prep wrapped, you guys. I'm beat. Time for a little R&R brought to you by the sponsor of this video, Beam. Getting a good night of sleep is something that I've come to value above pretty much everything else in my life. The amount and quality of sleep that I get makes or breaks how much energy I have, my mood, and how many hard things I can get done in a day. So for over a year now, I've been taking the Beam Dream Powder to help me sleep better. Dream is a cup of cocoa with ingredients like CBD, melatonin, L-theanine, and reishi mushrooms. These are all ingredients that are shown to help your body sleep better. And in fact, in a clinical study, 93% of participants reported that Dream helped them get better sleep. Lately, I've been into the chocolate peanut butter flavor, and I'll just mix a scoop into water before bed, drink it down, and then look forward to getting pulled into a cozy slumber that won't make me groggy the next day. So if you've been thinking about picking up Dream Powder, right now is Beam's biggest sale of the year. Just click the link in my description or scan this QR code to shop and get up to 50% off. Just click the link below and the discount gets automatically applied. I actually use this product, you guys, and I really love it. I even brought the pill form with me to Spain a few weeks ago to prevent jet lag, and it worked like a charm. The next day, it's time to make some ramen noodles from scratch, and they're actually not hard to make, they're just time consuming. To make them into a food processor, I'll combine 450 grams of bread flour, 5 grams of salt, and 8 grams of baked soda. What is that? Well, ramen noodles get their signature color, flavor, and texture from alkaline salts. In Japan, ramen noodle producers would use a salt called kansui to accomplish this, but in the US, the home cook's best bet is to make their own alkaline salt. To do that, I'll just spread a cup of baking soda onto a parchmented sheet tray and bake it in a 225F oven for an hour to turn the sodium bicarb into sodium carbonate. The carbonate is more alkaline than the bicarb. You can make a batch of this stuff and keep it covered in your pantry for about a year.
No.
It's like the devil's powdered sugar. Now, once I've got my soda in the chopper here, I'll grab some egg yellow food coloring. I had this in my pantry from when I made shumai dumplings a few months ago, and I think it's the best way to make these noodles have that bright yellow color that you associate with ramen. The kansui alkaline salt in Japan does that on its own, but sodium carbonate from the baked soda, at least in my experience, doesn't get the job done. So I'll add in just a little itty bitty tiny bit into 160 grams of water and stir that in. Now with the food processor running, I'll drizzle the yellow water into the flour until it's evenly hydrated and pebbly. Ramen noodle dough should be really frickin' dry, like 40% hydration. So to make this work, we'll actually need to let this flour hydrate passively for 30 minutes before we roll out the noodles. 30 minutes later, I'll flip the wet ramen sand into a bowl, then come back and squeeze everything together into a clod. I want to press the air out of this mixture and also allow the hydrated dough particles to link up with each other. Next, I'll cut this clod into 4 strips, then link those strips up into one long shaggy piece that looks kind of like a belt. From there, I'll grab my rolling pin and roll this belt a little flatter and wider. I'm just trying to massage this into something that I can put through my pasta roller on its widest setting. And once the dough is spread out into about 24 inches long, I will grab my pasta roller and throw my stand mixer on low speed. A hand crank pasta roller would work totally fine for this, by the way. Now I'm gonna feed this belt into the roller on its widest setting to get it flattened a little bit and more fused together. From there, I'll fold it in half and then roll it through one more time on the widest setting. At this point, I've got a wholly jagged, rough looking sheet of dough, but you know, it's kind of a start. From here, I'll roll this through 3 to 4 more times, cranking down the number on my pasta roller each time until I've got a sheet of dough that's flat and long. At this point, the sheet is looking good, but it's definitely not cuttable into noodles yet. So I'm gonna fold this in half and then repeat the same run through process 4 to 5, maybe 6 more times, cranking the number down on the roller each time until I get to the number 6. I'll mention that we actually want these noodles to be quite chewy. That helps them hold on to their texture in the boiling hot broth, but it also just makes them fun to eat. To get them chewy, that means the gluten needs to be quite developed and overworked, so don't be afraid to run this dough through the mixer a lot of times, basically. These noodles aren't a delicate handmade ravioli where you want the softest pasta sheet possible. Now, once I've got this dough rolled out into a long, clean sheet on the number 6, I'm gonna cut these down into roughly 12-inch long sheets. From there, I'll flour each side liberally so that the noodles don't stick together once they're cut down. Before I run these through my pasta cutter, I'll need to clean up the sides and cut the corners off like this. That'll make the sheet much easier to run through, and it makes for cleaner noodles overall. Finally, I'll just drop these noodle sheets through my spaghetti cutter and let the stand mixer do its thing. Of course, if you don't have this specific tool, you can cut these with a knife. Just be prepared for more rustic noodles. In my opinion, this is like the perfect Saturday afternoon cooking project. You can do it with someone you like, it's fun, it's pretty easy, and afterwards you have something really delicious to eat. If you don't want to go through the lengths here to make these, I totally get it. Most international grocery stores will actually sell a fresh ramen noodle. Those would be in the refrigerated section, and I think they're pretty good. Or of course, you could use dried ramen noodles that come in the packet. Those are actually good. Don't be ashamed. And once these noodles are all cut down, I'll measure them into 4 5-ounce portions. Now I'll just set those aside in the fridge for a minute while I finish the last 2 prep items. First up, soy sauce marinated eggs. For that, I'll drop 6 eggs into a small saucepan of boiling water and cook for exactly 7 minutes. No more, no less. 6.5, the white won't set. 8 minutes and the yolk is too firm. And after exactly 7 minutes, I'll drain off the boiling water and then immediately stop the cooking by covering the eggies with ice water. And once those are cooled down and peeled, I'll scoot them into a Ziploc baggie and cover with 50 grams of water, 50 grams of mirin, and 50 grams of soy sauce. I'll just squeeze the baggie to push out the air, zip it up, and then marinate these for 4 to 24 hours. Now, the last little bit of prep is the spicy aroma oil topping. This stuff separates mid-ramen from god tier stuff. It's really special. To make it, I'll combine 75 grams of canola oil with 10 grams of sesame oil, 10 grams of minced garlic, and 10 grams of ginger that I'm gonna break down by grating on my microplane. I'll just move this saucepan over to the stove and sizzle it over medium heat until the garlic is smelling fragrant. Next, in goes 30 grams of gochujang chili bean paste and then 5 grams of paprika. I'll stir that to combine and fry it for about 30 seconds. Then in goes 50 grams of mirin and 10 grams of honey. From here, I'll move everything into a high-sided container, drop in my immersion blender, and spin everything up for about 30 seconds. This chili paste aroma oil thing is like the signature of Ichiran's ramen, and I didn't really see it anywhere else in Tokyo. It's warm from the garlic, it's a little bit spicy, and that sesame oil adds a dark, toasty quality that pairs perfectly with the creamy, rich pork. Now to make a bowl of ramen, I'm gonna grab everything out of the fridge and then slice down my cooled pork shoulder. Ooh, even cold, I can tell this thing is perfectly cooked. The pork's gonna be juicy, fatty, and the bite's gonna be soft, but not falling apart. Now to sort out the broth here, I'm gonna combine 200 grams of the tare with 350 grams of the pork broth with a good amount of that pork fat on top. Ooh, look how jiggly this stock is. Oh my God. Now I'll bring this up to a ripping boil so that the fat can get re-emulsified with the liquid. And I'll also make sure that I drop my ramen bowl into the oven. This is a very important step. Now, the secret move that I use to make my tonkatsu broth as creamy as the Jedi level ramen shops is to drop in my immersion blender and spin it for 10 seconds. This fully emulsifies the fat on top and makes the broth creamy and super thick. Lastly, I'll drop in 2 slices of CHASHU pork to warm them up, and then I'll drop 1 order of my ramen noodles into some lightly salted boiling water and cook them for only 90 seconds. Since these noodles are fresh, they really don't need much time. And once these noodles are tender but chewsome, it's time to load them into the hot bowl that I filled with my piping hot, silky pork broth. Next, I'll shingle in my warmed pork shoulder. Then in goes 1/2 of my soy marinated eggs. Next, in goes a full grip of very thinly sliced scallions. And then finally, a tidy dollop of the spicy aroma oil. Oh my God. Look at this. I don't need to say anything, just look at it. Silky, creamy, milky pork broth that's got 5 types of umami going on. You've got springy noodles that have that signature eggy, sulfury flavor, and you've got tender, juicy, fatty pork. Yes, this recipe leaves a trail of dirty dishes a mile long, and it takes 2 days to make, but that effort is returned to you 5-fold in terms of pleasure. It's salty, it's meaty, it's luscious, and it's comforting in a way that just can't be understood until it's experienced firsthand. Let me know in the comments what your favorite ramen shop of all time is, and maybe I'll try to recreate their bowls in the future. Also, if you like delicious Asian noodle soups, then I think you're gonna like this video for Thai khao soi. It's one of the best chicken soups in the world. Now, let's eat this thing!